Hello, welcome or welcome back to Gavin Reads It All. I am very excited for the second episode of Gavin Reads All the King. See, I have to keep saying my channel name first so that you can get the series name. So I am going through all of Stephen King's books in publication order. There are some exceptions and little bits of rules here and there. I do mention in the very first episode what those are. So I will link the first episode of the series down in the description box if you've missed it. But essentially I am going through all of Stephen King's books in publication order, and I'm talking about every single book with spoilers. So please do not continue on if you have not yet read the books that I will be reading in this video. However, everything will be timestamped, so if you have a specific book that you have read and you want to hear my spoiler-filled thoughts on, then you can click on those timestamps and you won't be spoiled for any of the other books. I have 2,618 pages to read in episode 2. I only had 1,400 in the first episode. And with everything else that's going on at the minute, it is the run up to Halloween right now, and I am making all of my spooky videos, and my Vlogs of Halloween event is currently running too. And this is going to be episode 6 of my Vlogs of Halloween, so there's a lot that's going on at the minute. And the size of the books in this video are not going to help. So the 4 books that I'm going to be reading in this video are these bloody big bastards. We have The Stand, which yeah, this is the complete version. I know the complete version didn't actually technically come out until like 1990, but I'm just going to read the full thing now as the 5th book that I'm reading in my Stephen King series. And I vaguely read this back in 2020, but with everything that was going on that year, I cannot really remember anything about this book. So I feel like I will be reading it essentially for the very first time. I read it at a time when I didn't want to read it. I think I might have DNF'd it pretty early on, and I just can't remember anything about it. So I will definitely be giving it my full attention in this video. And then I will be reading The Long Walk, which is one of the Richard Bachman books. Never read that one before, and I haven't read the next 2 either, and I've never seen an adaptation of them. So we have The Dead Zone, and then finally Firestarter. I may try and watch some of the movies as well at some point. I also believe there was a TV show of The Stand made a few years ago. I might check that out after I've read it. But despite how intimidating this all looks to me, I cannot be more excited to be getting back into Stephen King's world. So let's start the second episode, and if you do end up enjoying, please do give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Okay, I'm about to start The Stand, and because I have a really hectic schedule that I have just kind of worked out myself for like the next month before I go away, I'm gonna have to try and finish this in 3 days. So I'm about to dive in. Wish me luck. Day 1 is done, and I managed to finish book 1. This is split into 3 books, and I am now on book 2. So if I can kind of keep up that momentum and have book 1 on day 1, book 2 on day 2, and so on, then I absolutely think we can get this done in 3 days. So I haven't finished this just yet. Usually I do finish the book first, and then I tell you all of my thoughts, like in this series so far. But with The Stand, I feel like because it's so big that I need to kind of split it into 3, I think. And I probably should have reduced the number of books I talk about in this video, considering, but I didn't think about that. And I've already commissioned an illustrator for the thumbnail, so I can't really change it now. But anyway, I am really enjoying this so far. I definitely don't remember anything from when I first read it, and I do have the audiobook to read along with, and I must have got the audiobook 4 years ago when I first started it, and it looks like I stopped it around about like chapter 30, so I actually mustn't have finished it the first time round. I must have like soft DNF'd it, but I'm wondering like why in the world would I do that, because like this has been so good. Well, actually I kind of do know why. This has been scarily, eerily similar to what we were going through in 2020. So if you don't know what this book is about, essentially there is an outbreak, a virus that is killing people, and we do have like different sets of characters, but I'm so apprehensive of liking any of them or like really getting invested in them, because the amount of times people just die is insane. But then again, it makes so much sense considering like what's actually going on with like the virus and stuff. And I kind of felt that from the very first chapter. There is this sort of epilogue-ish chapter before chapter 1. We have Charlie and Sally and baby Levon. Oh my god. I thought that we would be following them a lot longer than we did. It kind of sets up the book in a way that you could be introduced to any single person and they could be like dead in the next part. So yeah, we first have these 3 characters and they're running away from something. Charlie is getting his wife and child and they're like running off and he's like, something killed them, and they're like, what killed them? And even Charlie doesn't really know. There's so much vagueness with that first chapter, and then the chapter ends with Charlie coughing. And it's like the most normal of things, you know, like when you just have a cough or like when you get a cold. These are just like everyday symptoms, but that's why it's like so eerily similar to what happened in 2020, because it kind of worked on our paranoia, because there was a lot of paranoia going on around that time. I remember every single time that I thought I had a cough, I was like, oh god, it's probably COVID. So fortunately, I never got COVID. Touch wood, I hope I didn't jinx that. But the paranoia was rife. So as soon as a character starts coughing, or as soon as they start having a bit of a sore throat, it feels like a death sentence. And yeah, like Hap wipes his nose, Vic has a cough, someone's jaw's hurting. You just have all of these like very normal symptoms that is spreading so quickly. Even a character called Harry Trent passed the sickness to more than 40 people during that day and the next. It was like a very lethal chain letter. Someone asked for directions. Harry gave the New York fellow very clear directions on how to get to Highway 21. He also served him and his entire family their death warrants without even knowing it. The whole family would be dead by the 2nd of July. Ed was sneezing. Sarah went home to infect her husband and poker buddies and daughter Samantha. Next day, Samantha will go to infect everybody in the swimming pool, and so on. And so on. That is how that chapter ends. And it's just so scary how real that is and how quick it is. Like, we have no control over it. It isn't even like a tangible villain. It's just something that happens. And it's scary to me that we start off the book with Sally, Charlie, and baby Levon, and then by page 20 they're dead. All bets are off in this book. I feel like it's safe. I'm probably going to eat my words right now. For me, it's probably safe to say that maybe Franny and Stu are like the main protagonists, like the main ones that I think might survive till the end. I don't know, actually, because it was mentioned of like how a baby would be born into this world, and if it would also have the virus, if it would die in utero or anything like that, like how will that affect Franny? There's so many great questions about how this virus is affecting the world. But yeah, I think those two, maybe Nick, maybe Lloyd, but I don't know because his storyline is feeling a little bit dangerous right now. But anyway, I like Franny. I like her storyline. She ends up getting pregnant with her boyfriend Jess. And my heart went out for Franny when she tells her parents. Her dad was so accepting, and I love that he was so accepting of her. Like, he didn't really judge her, and he made her feel like she still had a home. But her mother, oh my gosh. Like, well, firstly, actually, I'm pretty sure Jess slaps Franny at one point, and then Franny's mother slaps Franny, and then Franny's dad slaps Franny's mum. So I'm sort of thinking, maybe we should change the title of this from the stand to the slap. There's a lot of slapping going on. But that initial family drama made me feel so connected to Franny. Like, I'm now totally rooting for her and her baby. And even our narrator says our heroine, little Fran. So I'm feeling like it's probably safe to say that Fran will make it quite far. And I was heartbroken when Fran's dad died. We don't even really get a scene. Like, this is the thing with this book too. Sometimes you don't get a character death scene. Same with her mum as well, actually. The way we find out is like we have this whole section of Franny, and you know, like she's peeling the potatoes and shit like that. And then just randomly in one of the paragraphs it says, since her father had died at 8:30 the night before. I was like, what? You're going to tell me that way? And then the next page as well, we first hear about the death of her mother in like this big paragraph, and then it ends with, it had begun with the death of her mother, the death of her father, and only intensified what had already been there. So that's how we find out about the mother too. It's like we're not getting these scenes. It's like almost scary the way that some characters are reduced to like a list. So later on we do have like this list of character deaths because there are so many people just dying. When Dietz just like pulls out a paper and he just says Victor Palfrey deceased, Norman Brewitt, Robert Brewitt deceased, Thomas Wanamaker deceased, Rob Hodges, Bert Hodges, Cheryl Hodges deceased, Christian Ortega deceased, Anthony Leominster deceased. Imagine that many deaths happening that all you are reduced to is a list. And that can be kind of a scary reflection on, again, like what happened in 2020. We get scenes of hospitals being overfilled. Like when Larry, his mum, dies and he talks about her dying in the hospital and there were so many people there that she died in like a bed in the corridor or something like that. There were like so many people around. It's like, damn, like society really does fall apart or starts to fall apart when something out of our control like this happens. Like, even the characters we've spent a little bit of time with, again, just a list at the end, no great loss, right? Oh my god, like, one of these chapters in here had this list of characters, like, or at least like people we haven't met before, which is like death scene, death scene, death scene, death scene, death scene, this person dies, this person dies, this person dies. Book called Sam falls down a shaft and dies. Irma pulls the trigger of a gun and dies. George sort of jogs himself to death, which actually I kind of wonder if that's a little bit of a nod to The Long Walk. Like, I don't really know what The Long Walk is fully about, I just have a kind of basic level understanding of what it could be about. I don't know, maybe that could be like a little Easter egg. Anyway, Eileen, she falls asleep with a cigarette and dies. Arthur faints and dies of shock. Candace cracks her skull after falling off a bike. Milton is bitten by a rattlesnake. Judy accidentally locks herself in a walk-in freezer where her dead family are and traps herself inside. Jim's electrocuted. Richard has a drug overdose. And that chapter ends with no great loss. And like sometimes no great loss is repeated like every now and then in the chapter 2. And I'm like, oh my god, like people are dying. People are dying, Kim. It just highlights the gravity of the situation. It just highlights how scary a situation this is. Even though a lot of those deaths aren't like attributed to the actual illness itself, but people are dying around that as well. Like everything is being affected by this virus. And we still don't really know exactly what it is, but we do have an inkling that it's the government. And, you know, there's so much distrust for the government in this. Like at one point, Stu, he's saying, oh, there's nothing about it on the TV. Like what's going on? Like shouldn't it actually be on the TV? You know, Arnett has been quarantined. Like why isn't it on the TV? There is a major breaking down of people in power and who should be in power in the government, and things that should be keeping everything in place is just crumbling. One of my favourite quotes, the bodies would rot where they fell. No one who has come down with it has gotten better. Like again, the hopelessness of that. So as soon as you do get this sickness, it's over. Who's in charge? Who is keeping everything in order? It doesn't seem like anyone, but I do kind of love it. And again, like I'm a little apprehensive to like form any connections or bonds or anything. And it's actually kind of hard to like bond with some of these characters because they can be pretty awful. Like the N-word being used so much, I got to say, is so jarring and I hate it so much. There are some downright despicable characters who I wouldn't mind seeing come to a grisly end. Like say for instance Lloyd, he and this guy called Pork, they were on this like interstate killing spree kind of thing. Like they killed 6 people in 6 days. That is such an interesting storyline, but he's scum of the earth and he does get arrested, he gets locked in a jail cell, and oh my god, like he meets this really interesting character. We need to talk about this character because I don't know who and what this is, but Randall Flagg. We get introduced to Randall Flagg just before the 200 page mark in chapter 23 and I have no idea what the hell is going on here. Like I just thought that this would be a story about, you know, the outbreak and like people trying to survive with this outbreak. But there's something a little bit otherworldly and strange about Mr. Flagg. So he's called Randall Flagg the Dark Man. From New Orleans to like pretty much Maine, it was his country. The woman he took to bed, when it was done, they were cold, so cold. And like again, that's like such a random part there, but it kind of just solidifies more of that whole otherworldly aspect of him. There's something not quite right with him. He goes by so many different names. There is a mention of a Mr. Oswald, which I think is in reference to the JFK assassination and the person who assassinated him. So this is like yet another reference to the JFK assassination. There's been so many in the book so far that I've read. But anyway, back to Mr. Flagg. It says his time of transfiguration was at hand. He was going to be born for the second time. The second time? What is this? Why else could he suddenly do magic? The time was not yet, but the time was soon. What time? The time of what? What's he planning? What's he got up his sleeve? He does come across as an antagonist, but this was not what I was expecting from an Outbreak book. And so many different characters are dreaming about him too. I'm pretty sure Fran's had a dream about him, Nick's had a dream, Stu. Yeah, Nick's dream, he's coming for you. He's out there now on the highways of the night, the highways in hiding, the Dark Man. And then in Stu's dream, the Dark Man put out his hands and Stu saw that they were dripping blood. Heaven and earth, the Dark Man whispered from that empty hole where his face should have been. All of heaven and earth. It's like the Dark Man killing all of heaven and earth. It's like, is this his fault? Or does he have some kind of hand in it? Or is his return, because it's saying, you know, like he's come back and he can suddenly do magic kind of thing. It's like his second birth or whatever. So like, has this event triggered him coming back? Or what have you. Like, he's just so intriguing and a little bit charismatic as well. So a little bit later on, when Lloyd is in the prison cell, and oh my god, the stuff with Lloyd in the prison cell is so gross. There's like a rat, and he kind of keeps it so that he can use it as like a sort of food ration, because he's trapped in this jail cell now. The person, I think his name was Trusk. I think he's the other person who was like jailed. Like, he's dead. Sorry if I get people's names wrong, but like, there's so much to remember. That guy's dead, and there's like bite marks on his leg because it's kind of indicated that Lloyd might have been like, had a little bit of a nibble. And it's kind of that question as well, like when you're in this situation, what do you do? Like if you are left with a dead body, would you eat it? That's grim. It's something I would never ever do, but I say that now, but if I was ever in this situation, I mean, I wouldn't be locked up. I wouldn't be Lloyd right now, but like, say if I was, what would you do? So yeah, he's trapped in the cell, everyone's, well, not everyone, but like people are dead and he can't get out of this jail cell. And then Flag comes, and Flag is so charismatic. It's a little bit strange, like he's coming across to Lloyd as if he's like his savior. And Lloyd is saying, if you're the devil, look at me, Lloyd. That's kind of chills. Honestly, chills. There was so much tension in that scene. I want to make you my right-hand man, Lloyd. Say you do not want this Flag fellow going around with Lloyd the killer, also potential cannibal, which again, like I might have to, you know, let him have that one because, you know, when you're desperate, you're desperate. You'd like to get even with the people who left you here, isn't that right? Not just those people, but everyone who would do a thing like that. Like, who does that leave? Like, you're free, Lloyd, coming out. So he's given Lloyd his freedom, and now he is going to be his right-hand man. And Lloyd looked at Flag with something like love. That is going to be such an interesting dynamic going forward. For the latter half of this book, I'm very invested in what Flag is going to do with Lloyd. Like, what's going on there? And is Flag the devil? Or is he a devil? You know, like, there's so many questions there. Not just Flag, though, but we've just literally got introduced to Mother Abigail as well. Nick says her, the oldest woman in America, a black woman with fluffy white thin hair. And she's singing, and Nick just wanted to listen to her sing. The singer was beautiful. And she says, Mother Abigail is what they call me. And this seems to be another dream. So, like, what is she doing? Like, is she the good guy? And is Flag the bad guy? What is the correlation between the two of them? There are so many people having these dreams of people in amongst all of this virus outbreak chaos. What is the connection? What is the correlation between them? So my favourite characters so far, I think, are Fran and Stu. And the characters I'm the most interested in seeing more of are Flag and Lloyd and Mother Abigail. Like, we've only seen Mother Abigail once so far. And already I'm like, who is she? Why am I so intrigued by her? She seems so alluring. Oh, and I do like Nick as well. So Fran, Stu, and Nick. I like those three. I did feel a bit bad for Larry. I thought Larry's bits were pretty good. He is a singer. He has this bloody song that I'm kind of sick of now. Baby, can you take your man? Oh my gosh. If I hear the audiobook narrator say that one more time, I'm gonna punch something. But yeah, I felt bad for him when his mum died. And then he went off, like, he's done his own little thing. Nothing too much to note for me personally. I am just trying to, like, keep track of all the characters as I'm going along. Like, I have so many things, like, highlighted in my notes are, like, quite extensive on, like, what characters are up to and what they're kind of doing at the minute. So, like, even though I've read this pretty quickly-ish, I am taking it all in and I do understand. But I really enjoyed and felt so bad when Larry was with Rita, and when he finds her dead in the tent next to him, and he's like, oh god, how long was she dead for? And how long was he sleeping next to her body? Because she does choke on her own vomit during the night. And he didn't realise at first. That was very, very creepy. So Larry's, like, kind of on his own at the minute, and I'm very interested to see what happens next. And I love the fact that Fran and Stu are together with Harold. I haven't forgotten Harold. Harold, I'm a little bit on the fence about. I don't know why. I think because he is in love with Fran. Like, he sees he's in love with Fran. But I don't know. I have a little bit of a sneaking suspicion that he's going to end up doing something to Fran. Especially with something that Stu says about how men feel like they own, like, women in women's bodies. I'll be plain as I have to. Stu went on, still speaking very nearly into Harold's ear. You know, and I know that there's no need for a man to be raping women. Not if he knows what to do with his hand. That feels to me like Stu has kind of read Harold a little bit too well. I don't know, like, now I kind of have a worry that Harold is going to, like, force himself onto Fran at some point. Because he does love her, and I don't think Fran will ever reciprocate. And now Stu is also like, maybe I'm falling for her after all too. That could be very messy. That could be very messy love triangle. Which, again, something else I wasn't expecting in this book. Another moment I love is when Nick comforts Jane as she's dying. So Jane is the sheriff's wife, I believe she was. And she's talking to Nick, and she mentions her wedding dress and, like, her happy memories with her husband, and that she would love to be dressed in her wedding dress. And, you know, she dies and Nick, like, helps dress her, and that was so touching. Like, there are so many great touching moments in this, in amongst all of the horror, just to remind you that these are people. These are still people. These characters are real life people too. They've had a history, they've got memories, they had dreams, and all of that is being taken away from them. So even though it's very easy to kind of forget who's who sometimes because there is, like, a huge mass of characters, it's so nice and refreshing every now and then to get some kind of backstory or some kind of humanizing scene just to remind you that these people are real. Well, real in this world, but, like, they kind of represent real people themselves. I'm just really enjoying it. I really, really am. I'm very excited excited to continue on. I thought with it being so long that it would be, I mean, sure, maybe it could be a little bit shorter, absolutely. Couldn't everything, but I feel invested now, and I'm actually excited to read, like, all of this. Like, this is massive. Like, this is one of the biggest books I've ever read. And actually reading it isn't as intimidating as I thought it would be. There is so much to talk about already. There is so much to love about it, as well as, like, hate about it too. But I've been pleasantly surprised so far. I finished book 2, and this has kind of turned into a totally different novel to how we began. And I totally understand though, like, the direction of the story makes a whole lot of sense. Like, in terms of, like, what is actually happening. So, like, in a post-apocalyptic world, obviously you will have civilization trying to rebuild, especially when, like, 99.6% of the population, was it 99.4? 99.4% of the population has died. So now you need to try and rebuild that society and make it so that humans can, like, live again on this planet. So I totally get it. Like, it makes sense, the direction of the story. But the second part of this book was around about, like, 500 pages, and I was incredibly bored for a lot of it. I'm so sorry. There are still, like, a lot of really good moments to talk about, which I will talk about. I do want to focus, like, more on positives than negatives, because the negatives are just, like, kind of a, I'm just not the biggest fan of this kind of story kind of deal. So I don't really love post-apocalyptic stories when there's a lot of focus on, like, town meetings and having, like, this newfound community of people trying to, like, rebuild civilization. I find all of that very, very boring. It's a little bit like I used to love The Walking Dead, but I would hate when it would focus on the humans being humans kind of thing, because, you know, it's like a zombie apocalypse story. If I just wanted to read about humans just going about their day, doing human stuff, I would just read a contemporary, I would just read a normal book. But no, like, I wanted, like, more of a post-apocalyptic, scarier kind of read, which, you know, is my personal preference, and it's kind of my expectations too. I love the start of this book, don't get me wrong. I think the first part of this was so, so good. I was, like, looking at potentially, like, a high 4-star, like 4.5-star for The Stand at that point. But yeah, in that 500 pages that I've just read, I kind of found myself just, like, not really being as invested, even though I do think there was a lot of good character work still, and again, like, some standout moments. So I love Nick again, like, oh my god, Nick. I was so sad when he died. Like, no. To be told that he died from a different character, like when Stu tells Fran about it when she's in the hospital after the explosion, it's just like, yeah, Nick was one of the casualties. I was like, no, please, no. I really enjoyed Nick. Like, I thought Nick was so good. And I love Nick's section in this. The first chapter of this is actually quite a few chapters in this section along. But I loved when Nick met Tom Cullen. And I really do like Tom Cullen. Don't like the R word being used so often, but, like, with Stephen King, I just have to kind of, like, okay, like, this is just the language that is used. But I do think Tom Cullen was, like, a really sweet and innocent character, and he still is. Like, I have no idea what's going on next, but I have a sneaking suspicion that he might die, because Stu hypnotized him, and he's now gonna, like, go to Mr. Flag, and he is just, like, gonna, like, scope it out and spy on them and then come back, and if anyone sees him, kill them, but if more than one person sees you, run, kind of thing. And that was kind of an interesting scene. But, like, poor Tom, like, he's so, like, innocent, and, like, he means well, and I really did love the scenes between him and Nick at the start of this section. Like, when that tornado comes, and it's kind of like, is it actually a tornado? Because it says a horrible darkness was coming out of the west. It was not a cloud, it was more like a total absence of light. It touched down about 3/4 of a mile away, and a long blue building with a roof made of corrugated metal exploded with a loud bang. He felt the presence of another being. It was the dark man, the man who came to life in his dreams, a creature whose spirit he had sensed in the black heart of the cyclone. Someone else came out of the twister. And that was really exciting. I thought, oh, like, this is at the very start of the second part of this book, so I was like, okay, I'm in for a ride. I'm in for such a ride. Then we have Larry, who meets Nadine and Joe, like this kid who tries to kill Larry, like, with a butcher knife, and Larry has to be like, well, I don't trust this boy around any kind of knives. Like, you might lost that one, but there are plenty of knives in the world. What's to stop him from, like, killing me some other time? So I did find those sections as well quite exciting. And Larry ends up following the messages left by Harold and Fran. And, like, so we do get this kind of story where a lot of these survivors end up finding one another. They are being drawn to Mother Abigail, and they form, like, the free zone, which is, like, a zone that's safe from the outside world kind of thing. And now most of our main characters are together, and it does feel like a very obvious sort of like good versus evil thing at this point. We are being told time and time and time and time and time again by Stephen King that these characters have dreamt about Flag and Flag is evil, and these characters have also dreamt about Mother Abigail and she is good and nice. And so we had that beaten in our heads for like 200 pages until they got to like Mother Abigail's. And even then, like, you know, Glenn, like, I'm not the biggest fan of Glenn. For one, he bloody left Kojak. Like, why? Why would you leave a dog and abandon a dog in this world? Like, he had no justifiable reason to abandon this dog. And then later on, when Kojak actually finds him, and Glenn's like, oh gosh, I feel so bad for leaving him. Yeah, you should. You should. Mother Abigail has, like, sent Stu, Glenn, Ralph, and Larry on a mission to go to Las Vegas where Flag is and make a stand. And Mother Abigail says, one of you won't make it. One of you won't make the journey, and I hope it's Glenn. That may make me a bitch, but like anybody who leaves a dog and abandons a dog in this world needs their comeuppance. And also Glenn is a character who annoys the hell out of me because it feels like he is over-explaining things, he is over-analysing things, he is telling us exactly what we should do and think and feel, and he's that character who's giving all the exposition, and I could really do without that. But I do still like Fran and Stu together. I think they're quite adorable in a way, even though that does lead to Harold. I knew a Harold as well, didn't I? I said there's something suspicious about him. Like, he's not gonna just let Fran and Stu be happy. He isn't gonna just sit down and like watch them fall in love when he's fallen in love with Fran. So I felt like I couldn't look away during those scenes, honestly. Like when we have Harold, he steals Fran's journal when she's sleeping, and he's like, oh, if she wakes up, I'll kill her. And it's like, okay, he's gonna do like something so awful. And I did say that I thought that he would like SA her, but it turns out that he is instead gonna plant a bomb in his house kind of thing, and then set it off with a walkie-talkie, which is what killed Nick. The bastard, the absolute bastard. I am so glad he didn't like violate Fran in that way though. Like, we've had enough sexual assault in this book. Like, Trash Can Man, and the kid. So he's introduced to the kid, and he says he's from Colorado. Is he the Colorado Kid? I've never read the Colorado Kid, but I've heard of the Colorado Kid, and I used to love Haven, a sci-fi show that aired way back when. I used to love that show. I never finished it though, and I think it's like loosely inspired by the Colorado Kid, so I don't really know exactly what that entails, like what they took as inspiration and what was like actually adapted, if anything, or if it was just like a loose idea. Yeah, we met the kid in, oh my gosh, the scene when he sodomizes Trash Can Man with a gun. So, oh my god. It's weird that Stephen King can have, like, because Trash Can Man isn't like a morally good character or anything like that. Like, he, you know, sets fires to things, and he's like kind of one of those antagonists, but bad things can still happen to his antagonists. And I just found that such an interesting part of this book, because then also Trash Can Man is like, oh, I'm home, I found home, and he's happy there. And I was like, I can't quite pinpoint exactly how I feel about these characters, essentially. To juxtapose that, we have Tom, who Nick says at this free zone, like, Tom is now accepted here, like, people love him, and, you know, people see past his disabilities and he is okay here. And juxtaposing that with the Trash Can Man, it's like both of these places are like safe areas, like, well, safe-ish, well, how would I describe it? It's so confusing. These are areas that they each find home. And yet, you know, Stu has sent Tom off on his own to go to Flag and observe and like send him into danger, even though Tom is supposed to feel at home there. And then, yeah, to be the opposite of that, we have Trash Can Man, who was sodomized. And it's just such a creepy, awful scene that was with the kid and Trash Can Man. And I was very glad to see Flag every now and then, but I wished we had more, because the amount of times we were told, oh, I had a dream about Flag, I had a dream about Flag, he is the dog man, he is evil, he isn't the devil, but he's an associate kind of thing. Like, there was so many times we were told, oh, he is evil, he is evil. We haven't really seen too much about that. We did hear about in one of Stu's dreams, I think it was, like, there are so many characters. I do apologise if I get them mixed up, but I think Stu is one who dreamed that he was like crucifying people on the highway, and that is terrifying. That's like such a scary visual, and I hope we do actually end up getting to see that, because I'm kind of sick at this point of being told how evil Flag is and not seeing him actually be evil. We didn't see him crucify people on the highway, we just got told he did in a dream. And I think there was a point as well where I don't know if he like actually physically assaulted Nadine. It could be some kind of dream, but I don't know, because like there's so much of it that kind of is a little bit vague, which I do find a little bit of beautiful storytelling. It does say the dog man entered her and he was cold. Flag had been in her, and when he had come, he had driven her away from the windows of her five senses, her loopholes on reality, and yet she is on her way, I think, now to Flag, because she is convinced Harold to leave the town. So I don't think he's like actually done that physically. I think he must have done that mentally. I don't know though, because Flag is, you know, a supernatural kind of being, I believe. We are still in the dark with a lot of the dog man. And so he could have actually been there rather than it just being a dream. I don't know. But again, like, this is one of the things I do love about The Stand, is that I am incredibly invested in what is actually going on and what is happening in the story. I just feel like there's just so much bogging it down because it's not my kind of story anymore. Like, I can totally get on board with the exciting parts of the characters and like their development and what is happening to them, but yeah, there's just too much bogging it down. And I guess finally what I want to talk about in this section is, yeah, Mother Abigail. I think she has the shining, or like she has the shine. She mentions that, and I was like, oh, this is like connected to the shining and that power that was mentioned in that too. So yeah, I just feel like there's so much connection with a lot of the Stephen King books, and when I think there might be a little nod to something else, I could be right, or I could be like reading way too into it maybe. She says, I started having dreams 2 years before this plague ever fell. I've always dreamed, and sometimes my dreams have come true. Prophecy is the gift of God, and everyone has a smidge of it. My own grandmother used to call it the shining lamp of God. Sometimes just the shine. I mean, so that was very interesting. And then I did feel when Mother Abigail left to go on her own little mission, I guess, I felt a little bit hopeless with her leaving. Like, I do see her as somebody who adds another layer of protection for this community because, you know, so many of them have seen her in their dreams, and she does represent a whole lot of good. So it felt like we were going to descend into chaos without her. She does end up coming back, and it looks like she's on death's door, and that's when she gives Stu and them the mission of going to Flag. And I'm like, what are they going to possibly do when they get there? Because she says, don't take any supplies, don't take food, don't take anything, just make your way there and make a stand. Which I love the tie back to like the actual name of the book, and book 3 is called The Stand. What do you expect is going to happen? Like, well, this is the thing, like, I'm very invested, but one thing again, like, I'm not really 100% on board with is Mother Abigail saying, oh, only white magic can stop him, and that again is just so different to the start of this story and like what I wanted from this story. I can really appreciate and love what it's doing, absolutely, but it's not my kind of story anymore, which I'm kind of a little bit worried about. However, I do think maybe the final part of this, which I only have like a little bit left, I'm hoping this kind of like turns it around for me a little bit, now that we do have them going on their way to Flag. And it seems like various characters are on their way to Flag, like Tom, Nadine, Harold, Stu, Ralph, Lloyd, no, not Lloyd, Larry, and Glenn. Now that they're all on their way there, I do feel like now we're going to have like some kind of turn in the story again, and it's going to be some kind of showdown. I am a little bit scared for Nadine at the minute. Not that I think she's like a good character anymore. This whole situation has changed so many people. Some people are like kind of morally grey, like you kind of don't know what is going on with them, or like their true intentions sometimes. Like, this whole situation has changed so many people that they've kind of had to adapt in this new world, and that's why I'm kind of like really interested to say like what happens with her and Harold. Very interested to see if Glenn dies. Like, I hope he does. Like, I know that's like really awful for me to say but like, I just don't like characters who give us a whole lot of exposition or tries to explain too much. I'm just like, please let me figure it out on my own. You're ruining the fun for me. And the fact that he left the dog. You never ever leave the dog or kill the dog. I will hate you forever. Day 3 of reading The Stand, and I'm finished. It's funny as well because I think I started about 4 p.m. on Friday. It's now 5:15 p.m. on Sunday. So, like, really that was, what, around about 49 hours I managed to complete The Stand? Not bad. Not bad at all. And yeah, I did put out a poll yesterday, which I won't refer to until the very end of the video, because I did the same thing with episode 1 where I'm asking you guys what your favourite book from the video is. And, you know, the poll results might change, but The Stand is currently winning. And I don't know what it is, but like, with the poll in the first video, The Shining won, and The Shining wasn't my favourite in that video, and I don't think The Stand is going to be my favourite in this video. I do apologise. I know this is very beloved in the Stephen King fandom. I know this is a very highly regarded book, and I do like it. I think it's a very good book. Just unfortunately, like, after the first part, it just kind of wasn't really for me anymore, which I've already mentioned. So with part 3, which was a lot shorter than the previous parts, and I was so thankful for it as well, I do think there were some killer moments in it, like some really great standout moments. I ended up finding what Nadine does to the Dark Man and Randall Flagg and their interactions so incredibly intense and dramatic to read. So when Nadine finally goes to him, it almost seems like the spell is kind of broken as soon as she sees him. She's a little bit repulsed by him, and then he ends up impregnating her, which was so awful and heart-wrenching to read. But I was like, okay, finally, I'm seeing with my own 2 eyes just how evil Flagg can be. Instead of just being told like what he's doing, oh, you know, he's doing this and he's doing that. No, like, we actually kind of saw that. And it was, yeah, solidifying the fact that Flag is not a man you kind of want to be anywhere near. But I love the fact that Nadine managed to goad him later on. She managed to bait him into pushing her out of the window, thus end up killing his spawn as well, which, you know, it's so interesting to see Flag act very childish and very childlike. I think Lloyd said it best, like he has a bit of a temper tantrum. And yeah, absolutely, I didn't think Flag would act the way that he did. He kind of like sabotaged so much. Like, I'm kind of not underwhelmed, but I just didn't expect this book to go the way it did, especially with Stu, Ralph, Larry, and Glenn kind of segment, with Stu being the one who ends up not making it to the destination. See, I thought Mother Abigail meant that one of them would die before they got there, but no, Stu just ended up breaking his leg, and so he had to get left behind, leading to the other three getting there. And maybe I was a little bit too harsh on Glenn. He just ended up getting shot in the face by Lloyd, and I felt bad for him. I did. Like, he didn't exactly deserve that, I guess. But that was an incredibly exciting scene. But yeah, definitely my favourite part of this section of the book was when Flag has Larry and Ralph, and he has them two, and he's about to publicly execute them. And, you know, the people of Vegas, they're watching. And then a guy called Whitney comes up and he's like, we are Americans, like, this isn't right. And it takes somebody who isn't part of the main cast or anything like that to make a stand as well, to go against Flag. And it was so inspiring and so kind of beautiful in a way that, I say beautiful very loosely, like, is anything really that beautiful? But like, it was very touching that, you know, someone would stand up there and be like, no, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this. Was not expecting Trash Can Man to come back with an A-bomb, essentially. Like, what the fuck, blowing pretty much everything up. And yeah, that was the end of that kind of venture. Totally unexpected, not exactly how I pictured Flag's kind of plan to come to an end there. So that was great, I love that. But then I think after that, it started to slow down a little bit for me again, and it started dragging, and I was like, okay, I'm kind of done. Like, I was so ready for the story to be over by that point. I'm so glad Stu survived, don't get me wrong. I think he's great. Love him as character. And again, Tom as well. Oh my gosh, I love Tom. The fact that he manages to find Stu and Kojak stayed with Stu as well. I'm so glad. So like, Kojak didn't actually die. Outlive Glenn. That's what you get for abandoning a dog. The fact that Tom and Stu, like, they were together for a while, and, you know, oh, poor Tom, when he realizes that Nick is actually gone and dead, oh, broke my heart. And then as well, when Tom is like, oh, this is the best Christmas I've ever had, oh, my heart is in bits for a lot of these characters. Like, I did end up feeling so attached to them. Did I already say, oh no, I don't think I've given you my rating yet, have I? The main reason why my rating is the rating it is because of the characters, for me personally, but I'll get to that later. I do find too much of it a little bit easy, I'm not gonna lie. The fact that Tom does end up coming across Stu is very convenient. And again, I know what you're gonna say, oh, this was like God's design, like this was all part of like the dreams and stuff, and it would have been led there. Like, sure, okay, yeah, I totally get that. It still feels very easy and convenient to me, just like how so much of it boils down to just people having prophetic dreams and people being led certain places. I don't know, it isn't my favourite storytelling style, it isn't my favourite narrative choice. You know, I am glad that Tom and Stu managed to get back to Boulder. Fran is okay, the baby's okay. There is so much hope by the end of this that I was like, oh, you know, like, we've left this in such a good place. But maybe I still would have been happy if we ended round about when Las Vegas got blown up. I will say though, Stephen King loves to have this big explosion, big fire scenes and like things burning down as his sort of conclusion to a lot of stories. Like, say in Carrie, the school and the town gets burned. In Jerusalem's Lot, there's, you know, fire there too. The Overlook Hotel burns down. In this one, we have Las Vegas. Stephen King loves his fire, doesn't he? Which, you know, when we get to Firestarter, I'll be a little bit disappointed if the book doesn't end in fire. I mean, yeah, it was still very, very good. Some great unsettling scenes by the end of this book. Feels like such an achievement to have finally finished reading this and to say that I've read it as well. It felt like I ran a marathon, which is probably a great segue into the next book. But I think if this had been shorter, it just felt too exhausting by the end for me to fully enjoy. This is a book I don't think I would ever reread. Once is definitely enough for me. I wish we stuck with the initial premise for the entirety of the book, which I don't know how that would have worked, but I do prefer the first part of this over the second and third. So for that basis alone, I'm going to give this one a 3 out of 5 stars. I do think I also prefer The Shining over this, which puts like The Stand 4th out of 5th so far in my leaderboard, which again, I feel awful about. I do know so many people love this. It's one of their favourite Stephen King books ever, and if you are one of those people, I totally understand. One of the great things about Stephen King's works is that you can see any single book of his and see the merits in it that would warrant it to be someone's favourite book. I can totally see why this is someone's favourite. It was just too long for me. It went in a less favourable direction for me, but I still totally get and understand and appreciate the greatness of this book. But unless I hate the next 3 books, once again it looks like I am disagreeing with the poll that I've been putting in my community page on YouTube. But we will see. We will get to the end of this video. We will see exactly how I end up feeling compared to you guys. Going into this, I didn't realise I could get so emotional while reading Stephen King. This one really, really tugged at my heartstrings. It was so heartbreaking. It felt so painful, and I went into this completely expecting a different story. I actually thought this book was about, you know, a group of guys who have to walk until they die. And I didn't realise there was a whole set of rules. I didn't realise there was actually like going to be soldiers who would shoot them. And I didn't realise there was like this whole backstory on the long walk and all of the things that go into it. I just thought it was about people walking until they fell over and died. And I'm kind of glad that I was wrong about this. We follow Ray Garrity, and he applied to do the long walk, and I again didn't realize that it was even an option. Like, you could choose to do it or you can choose not to do it, and there are like 2 back out dates, so like you can actually back out of it. And some of these walkers were actually backups as well, so like Peter McVreys, McVreys, I want to call him McVreys. Not 100% sure how to pronounce his name. I keep want to say McFitty's Biscuits, but like that's not the one. He was a backup, and I think 12 people had backed out, and then McVreys was the 12th backup person. So like he was literally the last person to be put into the long walk. And it's like something that's televised. It honestly feels a little bit like the Hunger Games before the Hunger Games in a way. I mean, less so Battle Royale, which I love, by the way. I love Battle Royale, but like more Hunger Games because it is being broadcast. It is kind of like violence against teenagers and showcasing that to a whole world of people who are like eating that up. Well, not everyone's eating it up, but there's a huge commentary, I think, on people themselves and like how we consume media, as well as like what we do to our children and like how children are exposed to that violence and the violence against children. There's so many things that I think is going for this book that I genuinely love. So we'll talk about everything as much as I can. So I started this honestly not realizing what this whole ticket thing meant. You know, the fact that they have to walk 4 miles an hour and they're not allowed to go under that, and they get 3 warnings, and when they get their, you know, strike, they get a ticket, but the ticket is actually like them getting shot to death. And we don't really know that until about 20 pages in when the first person gets it. And it's kind of bizarre. It's so bizarre, because before that, the feeling of it is very ominous. Like, there is like this feeling of tension, and then like a random woman screams, but you just think it's somebody who just doesn't want their son to do this thing. There is nothing about people getting killed on this long walk, or the fact that only one person is going to come out of it at the end of it. So there was like so much intrigue in those first 20 pages where I'm like, okay, something does feel a bit off, but not off enough. And then that first person dies, and then I'm like, oh, they get shot. And I love the fact that we don't get a whole info dump on what the long walk is. And I do think there are still so many questions by the end of this relatively short-ish story about like, why do people do the long walk? Like, what is it that, you know, draws people to doing it? If it's optional, then why do people actually do it? I know there's like that prize at the end, but is it worth it when you are competing against 99 other people and you have to walk so much and you see the agony that they go through and it's televised and you get to watch people die on TV? And like, how is that not off-putting to anyone? Like, there are so many layers to it, and I think it's like such a fascinating concept that I kind of would have loved it if this had have been a more full-length novel of like 400-500 pages, because I think there is still so much that you can do with it. And being in the mind of a teenage boy, it was very jarring. Like, I didn't love it myself, even though I did used to be a teenage boy back in the day, not too long ago. I'm kidding. It's not the kind of mind you want to be in, honestly. Like, I do find that very weird sometimes, like the things that Garrity says, like especially on the second page, he's talking about his mother, and like he's given a little description, and the second thing he says about her are her breasts. His mother was also tall but too thin. Her breasts were almost non-existent. Talking nubs. I'm like, why? Like that was like literally the second thing. Like, at least put that at the end of the paragraph. Like, give us a description of the rest of your mother first before you talk about her breasts. It's so weird. But again, like, I have to remind myself constantly. Well, I don't have to remind myself. Like, I do know that this is a teenage boy. And you know what? That ended up making it that much more heartbreaking. There are so many things in this story where, you know, sometimes they say something a little bit immature. Like, sometimes it made me laugh. Like McVreous, when a woman shouts, he's not going to make it. And I think he shouts back, your tits aren't going to make it. There's so much immature humour as well with it. Like, Garrity as well at one point says, oh, well, you've got skid marks. There are so many like immature moments, and then it's like, oh, hang on, but that kind of breaks my heart because they're just kids. These are just kids, and they're being slaughtered, essentially. They're not ready to die. They still have their whole life ahead of them, but with this long walk, which is why I'm thinking the long walk itself is an allegory or like some kind of commentary on life itself, which I do really want to explore more because I think it's such a fascinating idea, which I'm sure like a lot of people have already brought up. But going back to it then, the characters are so young, and I felt so much emotion for them by the end of it. McVreous was my favourite character. He saved Garrity multiple times, and I was like, this is sort of a competition. Like, there can only be one person left at the end of it. So when you're saving someone's life, you're kind of making your death seem more likely. Like, that takes so much bravery to do and so much selflessness to do as well. And like, McVreous is between 16 and 18. I wasn't sure if he had an actual like age, but like, he's still young, he's still a teenager. So I really enjoyed his character. I thought he was such a good one, and I loved it when he kept calling Barkovich a killer. Like, he had his own morals, and then he ends up like dying like 2 or 3 pages from the end. I was like, he was so close. Like, my heart was breaking at that moment. In fact, my heart started breaking, I think it's when Scram and Meg, oh my god, when Scram and Meg, when they die, and you know, they're not speaking the same language, they sit down and they're just having a conversation, they've given up, they're like not doing the walk anymore, and then they get shot together. They're not even speaking the same language, and yet they're talking to one another. And again, that's why I think this is like such a beautiful kind of commentary on life itself. You know, there are so many different people on this walk of life, like so many people who have different colour skin, from different cultures, from different countries, they speak different languages, and yet we all bleed the same, which is something that McVreous said about Ewing. And poor Ewing, he gets blisters, and Barkovich, the little bastard, he is a racist, C-U-N-T, and yeah, as soon as Ewing dies, McVreous says, we all bleed the same. And I think that's like such a hard-hitting moment of realization that all of these boys are pretty much the same. It doesn't matter where they come from, what part of the world they come from, what language they speak, what colour skin they have, they are all the same people. And that's when I started thinking, oh, this long walk, it's a metaphor, isn't it? Like, it's a metaphor for life. And then there was a little part later on when one of them says something like, what's eating me? I have to worry about next year's taxes, things like this, that's what's eating me. And I was like, am I on the long walk? Because I'm worried about taxes. There are so many things about life, and I think with the rules of the long walk as well, like these very specific and silly rules, you can't slow down on this walk. If you slow down and you fall behind, you will get killed and you'll get shot, and like we'll kill you. And there's like so many rules that they have to follow. It almost feels like the government make us have to follow all these rules. Like, you have to pay your taxes by this point, you have to do this, you have to do that, and obviously we have to keep our society in structure. But you know, like, people in power taking and taking and taking from, you know, the common man. That's kind of what it felt like, and that's why I thought, oh, the long walk, you know, we are all passing different people who are on different walks of life, but we're still on the same road, you know, and like, we all bleed the same, and we all have the same struggles and the same things, and we speak different languages, but we are the same people. And it's just like, only one of us will be left standing by the end of it, you know, like, people will die around you as you're walking towards the end of your own life, and that's just so heartbreaking again. And we are forcing teenage boys to experience that in a very physical and very public way. So the fact that people are watching on the sidelines, almost as if it's like the Great North Run. So like, I live around about Newcastle in the UK, and there's like this Great North Run, and I couldn't help but think of that, and like people on the sidelines like cheering and seeing everything happen. But like, imagine if the Great North Run, or any kind of run or race where people are watching and waiting for you to die, and they are just watching it happen. There was a mention of the fact that they were animals and they wanted to see people's blood on the roads and stuff, and like, I feel like that was a commentary on people who are just like watching violence and who are eating that violence up, and you know, all of that. Like, there's just so much great nuance, I think, to the story that makes it such a great read. And it made me look at myself. I was like, am I doing the long walk? Is this play about fucking us? It got me scared. Not just for the characters, but for me myself. Which I think is a very effective way of telling a story. In some moments I really enjoyed from this one is, say, when Allison dies. I wasn't sure how to feel about Allison, because there was a moment when he was like, oh, I want Garrity to die. And like, I think he shouts at McVreous for saving Garrity. Yeah, when Garrity has a laughing fit. There are still, again, like quite a few different characters. And this is the thing with Stephen King books. I think it takes a little while to, you know, fully understand which character's which. But yeah, it's Allison. He's kind of hating McVreous for saving Garrity from his laughing fit. And then I was like, okay, well, I don't know if I like Allison. Like, if he dies, he dies. And then he does die, and it's so horrific. Like, his intestines come out and stuff, and it's like the soldiers are playing with him, and it's like so sadistic. And even though, you know, like sometimes these kids are like awful to one another, like say Barkovich, fucking hate him. I was kind of glad when he died, but at the same time, I still felt so, what's the word? Like, I felt a little bit gutted still at the same time that it even had to happen. In the way that Barkovich like rips out his own throat. Ew, like that's, oh my gosh, like, I felt like I should have been more satisfied by that, because, you know, Bogovich earlier on, he made this poor guy called Rank, I think his name was, he made him kind of stumble because he kept goading him, and yeah, poor Rank, he couldn't get back up, so he ended up getting killed. And so McVreous was calling Bogovich a killer every single time he talked to him, which I kind of loved. I loved it every single time Bogovich opened his mouth, McVreous would just say, shut up, killer. Shut up, killer. You know, I love that. But still, like, when Bogovich actually dies, I didn't feel that satisfaction that I wanted, because, again, like, we have this story where all these kids are pretty much just the same. They are still kids. They are still children. And they haven't experienced life fully yet. And while Bogovich was definitely a sort of antagonist in the way that he was antagonizing the other boys, trying to get them to die, you have to realize as well that they have to kind of fend for themselves. If they want to win this thing, they can only win it alone. And so when somebody has those kind of tactics, it feels dirty to us, because it is costing other people their lives, but yet his life is also on the line. So it's like, okay, well, do you play the game, or do you just suffer through the game and just hope for the best? And it felt like Bogovich was playing the game, which, you know, I did resent him for, but at the same time I could also understand, which makes me feel awful, because I was like, I don't want to understand him. Like, he caused the death of another person. I'm pretty sure he told a reporter at one point that he was going to dance on the graves of the people that died. Like, that is awful behavior. Like, there was no feeling there with Bogovich, which is why, again, I didn't like him, even at the end. I felt sorry for him, but I didn't like him. He was just very uncaring and unfeeling, and that rubbed me up the wrong way. But yeah, I knew there could only be one person to win, and I wanted it to be either McVreous or Garrity, and yeah, gutted McVreous didn't make it. There was another guy called Stebbins who was so extremely interesting. I had no idea that he would end up being the Major's son. The Major is like, I think, the person who is like running the whole walk thing. The Major does have a lot of power in this world, and at the very end of the walk, it is the Major who, I think, you ask him what you want and you shall receive. So that's what the winner gets, as well as, I think, lots and lots of money. But yeah, Stebbins turns out to be the Major's son. He was a bastard, and he was in the race acting as a sort of rabbit, and he was supposed to like make the dogs, aka the other kids, like run faster kind of thing. There was like this really cool kind of metaphor for it, where, you know, like that race where a fake rabbit is running and the dogs are running after it. That was kind of the parallel there, and I kind of really enjoyed that visual. But yeah, I kind of felt bad for Stebbins by the end too, because yeah, he doesn't make it. Got very close. I think he was the runner-up actually. He got very close, and then he dies. And he wanted acceptance in his father's family. His wish was to be accepted into his family and seen as a son, I think. So that, again, very heartbreaking. So I really did think Stebbins was a great character too. Garrity himself was a very interesting character. I really did like some of the times that we would get more of his story. Garrity kept bringing up a friend from the past called Jimmy Owens. And I don't really have like any thoughts or feelings on that really. I'm a little bit confused of like why Garrity kept bringing it up. Like, what was the importance of that exactly? I don't think that was like fully explained. I think it's something that you have to read between the lines of a little bit more, and I can't really quite read between the lines on that situation just yet. So if anyone has any theories, please do let me know down below, or if you know why it kept getting brought up, then please do let me know. But yeah, I think it has something to do with his mum and what his mum did after she found Jimmy and Garrity doing things. I'm intrigued. But also the fact that he has a girl back home called Jan, we randomly found out about that about maybe a quarter of the way through. But even before that, Garrity ran up to this random girl and started like kissing her. He got 3 warnings before he like left her, and it was like this really random moment. And I guess as a teenage boy and you have these people screaming your name and stuff, I mean, I guess that would kind of elicit some kind of feeling in you. But it just felt so weird because we hadn't heard about Jan until like long after that moment, and apparently he loves Jan and he can't wait to get back to Jan and stuff. So I just found that a little bit bizarre that we wouldn't find out about her earlier, and we had that moment with that girl. It just, I don't know, I didn't really feel a whole lot of stuff there with who he loved in terms of like with Jan. That whole love story, that's one of the reasons why I haven't given this book a 5 stars, that there were some parts of it where I was just like, that felt like a little bit forced in, this stuff with Jan and how much he loves her and stuff. I guess that was just like a way of highlighting teenage love and the feelings that feel so powerful at that age, especially since McVray's had proposed to a girl called Pris and wanted to marry her. Again, like, he's so young. He is so young. All of them are so young. The whims of love at that age are so strong, which is again why I found it so random that we would randomly find out about Jan only a few ways into the book if he felt that powerfully for her. There was a really random moment when a guy called Gribble gets blue balls, and like he's like, it hurts, it's so painful. I'm like, look, as a teenager, sure, maybe you feel like it does hurt and stuff, but like it's just so random and so weird. But obviously I'm not like deducting points off it because of that or anything. I was laughing at that point. I was like, blue balls, really? Oh, another moment as well is when a screaming woman is shouting for her son, and she's like, my boy, ugh. Like, how do you live with yourself watching something like this on TV, knowing that, you know, these kids are gonna, well, 99% of these kids are gonna die, and their families, and the families are watching it? Like, how do you cope as a parent seeing your son go through that? So my heart totally went out to this poor woman. The walk itself is so grueling and tiring, and the fact that you can't stop and they want to stop so badly, and they go for 5 days and they're walking hundreds of miles. It was so admirable, the fact that they could do that. There were many times when I was worried, especially since very early on, Garrity says, and I feel tired. And this was so early on in the book. I was like, damn, we still have like 200 pages to go. You can't be feeling tired now. How do you think I feel as the reader reading this? I feel tired too. Don't be tired just yet, please. So yeah, very early on they were starting to feel tired, which I totally understand. And it just added to the fear that anybody could die at any minute. And that was the thing that was carrying me through this book too, was that I really was rooting for Garrity and McVray's and some of the other boys to make it. But knowing that only one of them would just added a whole other level of suspense to this that I thought was like really, really well done. So I was glad that Garrity, I think, wins in the end. It's so vague, like I can't really fully explain the ending. He does see the Major and he's walking towards him, but there's also like this dark figure that appears and we don't know who the hell that is, and he touches Garrity, and then Garrity feels the strength to run. And I'm like, okay, there's a few questions. One of the first things I thought of, because I've just finished The Stand, and I know this is stupid, I know this is so stupid, you can roast me down below if you want to, but like, here's that dark figure, Flag. Is he Flag? Flagg. Is that him? I don't think it is, because this is a Bachman book, and I think Stephen King wrote this when he was a teenager himself, I think. So I don't think there's any connection with Flag or anything like that. But because I've just read The Stand, I feel like as soon as any kind of dark figure is mentioned, I think of him. It's like I'm almost scarred by that man. Any shadow person I see, it's Flag. I just found it weird that he would touch Garrity, and Garrity would have the strength to run. Like, what is that? It's like some kind of magic power? Or is that dark figure Death? And when Death touches Garrity, he has the strength to run because he's free. You know, like his soul is free, his spirit is free, and he is dead and he is free to run with his fellow friends who also died along the way. You know, like, oh god, which breaks my heart, honestly. Like, I do want Garrity to have won and live a nice long life after that, but also you think, you're winning at what cost? You win at what cost? There was a moment in this where someone said, we all lose. Because yeah, even if you win, what you've experienced that entire time, and the kind of damage you've done to your body in that time too, will you even be able to live long enough to enjoy the reward? We find out about previous winner, he lived a week longer than everyone else. Is that really a life? is that really winning? So yeah, there's so many great questions that this brings up that I just found so fascinating. There is like so many great things about this book, but I do think that this isn't Stephen King's best written book now at this point. Like, there have been better written books that I've read, and a lot of the feelings that I get out of this are feelings that I have like, oh, this is what it's trying to say and it's what it's trying to do about this. So I am going to give it a 4-star, but it's currently my second favourite Stephen King book, and I'm going to bump Salem's Lot up to a 4.5 because now it's been like nearly 2 months since I read Salem's Lot. It's still one that has stuck by me this entire time, so I want to give that just a little bit of a higher rating. I don't think it's quite a 5-star just yet, but who knows, maybe in the future I'll change it again. But Salem's Lot is definitely my favourite so far still. So The Long Walk has like shot in at number 2. I definitely think it's better than Carrie, but I still think Carrie has so many great things about it, which is why it still has a 4-star itself. And I would be very shocked if any other story beats The Long Walk in this video, and that would be so apt considering this is currently second in the poll on my YouTube community page for this episode. Definitely the most emotional I've been reading a Stephen King book so far. A great time was had by all, despite the subject matter. I don't think I could do The Long Walk. I don't think so. I think this is like the Stephen King book that I would never want to be in. Unless they gave me some headphones and they were like, oh, well, you can listen to music on the way. Because I would just put on some Kylie Minogue and I would be right at the front. I would probably win if I had some music on. And now this comment that I got in my first Stephen King video makes a whole lot of sense. I can't tell if there's something wrong with me or if there's something wrong with you, because this is yet another example of the fact that I ended up really enjoying this one. Like, I think more so than the people who voted on the poll, because I think this came dead last. Again, I will show the poll at the very end and the result of that. I really, really like this one. I think this might be my favourite one so far in this video. And this was the one that I was the least excited for because I had no idea what this was actually about before going into it. Never seen the movie adaptation of it before. I never hear anyone talk about it either, really. Whenever you think of like classic Stephen King, I don't think this one like really comes up. But yeah, I freaking enjoyed it, okay? I thought it was so good. This one follows John, or Johnny Smith, and he has like this fall when he's younger on black ice and he hurts himself and he gets these kind of like feelings that something is going to happen, like say the radio. You kind of get a sense of what's going to play next, but like he doesn't really think too much of it. And then, you know, as he's a bit older, he falls in love with a girl called Sarah, and they are at this carnival fair thing, and he plays this like Wheel of Fortune game, and he ends up doing like really, really well on this thing, and it scares Sarah a little bit, like how well he's doing, and like she starts to throw up. And I was kind of looking at that like very interestingly, like why is she throwing up? Like why does she feel like this as Johnny is like doing so well at this Wheel of Fortune game? Because she seems a little bit scared by it, but like you can't really put your finger on what it is that's scaring her, neither can she. But yeah, anyway, he ends up getting into a car accident right after this whole thing when he drops Sarah off at home, and he is in a coma for 4.5 years. And when he wakes up, he has this uncanny ability where when he touches someone, or like it doesn't happen to everyone, but like when he touches someone, he kind of gets this psychic vision of either something that's going to happen or, you know, like things from the past. And that's kind of the premise of this. And it was so interesting, especially since I don't think Stephen King goes the more conventional route with this book. Yet again, this feels kind of like a book in almost 3-ish, 4-ish sections, which it actually kind of physically is in 3 sections, but I mean like narratively, you can feel it's kind of split up. And there were times during reading this, I thought, oh, this is going to go in this sort of procedural route. He's going to get a vision and he's going to like solve crimes and stuff like that. And that only really happens the once, which was amazing. Like I loved when it actually happened in this book. There's a part where it's the Castle Rock Strangler, and I really love that section. I thought it was great. And I thought that's kind of what this book was going to do. But Stephen King just loves to keep me on my toes. He doesn't love to go a conventional kind of route with his stories. Oh my god, there's so much to talk about this book. These are pretty much my notes for the Dead Zone, and I'm like, where do I even bloody begin? You know what I mean? Where do I start? So let's start with things that I wasn't really like the most in love with. And I think, I don't know if it's because I'm cynical, I just don't really get a whole lot of like romances. I'm not the biggest fan of romances and stuff. However, I was shipping Johnny and Sarah, and the fact that Johnny is losing 4.5 years of his life in the things that he loses in that time, including the love of his life, Sarah. I have so much empathy and sympathy for Johnny, who honestly I thought was a great main character. He has such an unassuming name. John Smith is like the most common name and the most boring of names that you can think of. So sorry to all the John Smiths out there. I'm sure you're lovely. And that's kind of why I love the fact that Johnny gets these abilities, and he is like the most humble and like, I guess nicest man you can think of. Like the fact that he's a teacher and he loves what he does so much. He loves being able to help the kids. And then we get this section where after he's lost his job, he helps to tutor this guy called Chuck. And I felt so proud of Chuck myself. One of the things I really love about Stephen King is that he does write these characters in such a way where we'd only known Chuck for like 20 pages, but I was so proud of Chuck when he like really gets something. Like Johnny has tricked him into remembering and learning something, and it's like the most satisfying moment. Even for me as a reader, I felt so involved and invested in Johnny's life that when Johnny is talking about like how, you know, when he actually helped Chuck, that felt better than when he like solved the case of the Castle Rock Strangler, for instance, and it felt better than anything else he's done before because he's helped a kid, he's helped someone achieve some kind of academic greatness, and I freaking love that, which is why I felt so bad for Johnny when he kept getting, you know, bad news after bad news, essentially. Like, what would you do? And this is actually a great book because it asks you so many different questions. Like, what would you do if you were in a coma for 4.5 years and you woke up and your parents were a little bit older? Like, oh my gosh, losing that time with your parents is so devastating. Even though Johnny's parents were both still alive, he sees them and he could obviously see that they've gotten older, and that is just the most devastating thing you can think of. Imagine losing 4.5 years of spending time with your parents. All this limited time that we have, it's crushing. And then to find out that the love of your life is married and she has a child now. I can't even imagine it. I can't. Mainly because I've been single my entire life, so I don't know what love feels like. But I can hazard a guess, especially with Johnny, because even before his accident, they have the best time together at this fair. And even before that, when Johnny is like, I would like to take you out on Saturday, and Sarah's like, oh, I have plans, and Johnny like seems so disappointed, and then Sarah's like, with you, silly, and then Johnny's face just like lights up like a light bulb, and you can just feel how much he loves her. Oh no, his face lights up when she says I love you to him. That's what happens. Yeah, she says I love you, Johnny, she said, and his face lit up like a lamp. And then, like 2 sentences later, she nodded, but it was 4.5 years before she talked to Johnny Smith again. Which Stephen King loves to end paragraphs like that. It was the last time he ever spoke to him. It would be the last time he would ever breathe. It would be the last time he'd ever enter that room. Stephen King loves little cliffhangers like that. Another sentence kind of like that is bewilderment which would not last much longer because the cabbie was embarked upon the last minute of his life. And this is the cab driver who was driving Johnny right when the accident happens. And again, like, this is just proof of Stephen King's amazing storytelling style. I do think he's a fantastic writer, definitely long-winded sometimes. There were some like moments in this, especially with backstory, especially with Greg. Fucking Greg. Don't worry, I'll talk about him. I'll talk about that. Don't you worry. There are definitely times when Stephen King like throws a little bit too much in at once, especially with backstories. Sometimes it's like almost list-like with Greg, it's like in 1958, in 1965, in this, that, and the other, and it's just blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of text, of backstory, and I'm like, I don't care. Don't give me all of this information at once. Don't make it so boring. Like, I don't care about any of this, and half of this stuff you don't even need to know. I would prefer it if we got backstory like sprinkled in, maybe in dialogue, maybe it's two characters talking, maybe we get told something at a crucial moment when we need to know about it. It's almost like Stephen King, he has backstories on all of his characters, and he's like, okay, well, I don't want this to go to waste, so I'm just gonna write all of this in the book. And like, even though I'm saying, yes, Stephen King is a fantastic writer, I love it when he can do things like the cabbie was embarked upon the last minute of his life and stuff like that. There were definitely times when I was like, Stephen King, I just wish you wouldn't. And there is another moment where I think Stephen King writes, oh, so beautifully, is when him and Sarah, after he's woken up, and it's the conversation where she, even though she's married, she is saying, all I want is what's taken from us, and I want it with all my heart, Johnny, do you? I want you to hold me and kiss me and love me. I think it's wrong, but I can't help it. It's wrong, but it's right. It's fair, because they have been robbed. They were robbed of a love that could have led them places. And even though Sarah has moved on, she's married, she has a kid, that time in her life in Johnny himself is so important to her in shaping who she has become that it just feels like a book that can't end because there is still this missing chapter and they need to finish that chapter. But this is what Stephen King says: time had provided them with this little air pocket in exchange for the main floor of which they had been robbed. I love it. Isn't that just like a fantastic line? Isn't that like Stephen King just showing off? Don't you think? Like, I love that. So yeah, Johnny and Sarah do end up, you know, putting a little full stop at the end of their relationship. Well, I mean, they do still write letters and stuff, and like they are like friends, but like their romantic relationship, the love that they felt for one another, like the romantic love, they needed this to move on. Obviously I was conflicted because obviously you shouldn't be cheating on your husband, but at the same time this needed to happen for both of them. And by this point I was like, yeah, I'm on board. Like I can see why this needed to happen. I am seeing a pattern with parents as well in Stephen King's books. It always seems like the dad is the reasonable one and the mother is the unreasonable one. Vera is very religious and Herb has to like constantly tell her like, hey, tone it down, shut up, stop saying that. Like Herb constantly has to like rein her in. And when Herb meets Sarah, well, Herb and Vera meet Sarah for the first time at the hospital after Johnny's accident, Herb is the one who kind of like welcomes her in pretty much straight away without saying anything. And Vera is the one who's like very judgmental and doesn't want to let Sarah in. And I noticed that with Fran's parents in The Stand. Obviously, Carrie's mother was very religious. Although, you know, Fran's parents in The Stand, the mother, she was very traditional, but I don't really think we got a whole lot of the religious side from her, I don't think. Or at least it wasn't like as extreme as like Carrie's mother and Vera. But we still have those two roles, the dad and the mom, and the dad being the one who's like more accepting and the mum who isn't. We get that again in this. In Herb, oh my god, I loved Herb. I wanted the best for Herb, even though he like wished that Johnny had died, because prolonging that for like 4.5 years in that coma, you do give up hope by that point and you do feel so bad for Herb. The dad, he's like, oh, I just wish Johnny would die. And that guilt afterwards too, when Johnny does survive and he wakes up, like Herb goes on such a journey and he's just so considerate and nice. Later on in the story, like years and years and years later, when he wants to remarry to Charlene and he asks Johnny like if that's okay, and Johnny's like, of course it is. And you know, Herb saying, well, you know, he's been lonely since Vera died and Charlene's lonely. And then he asks Johnny, will you stand up with me at my wedding? Like, oh my gosh, I was about to cry. I was like so happy for him. He deserves to be happy. And I love it in a Stephen King novel when I feel these kinds of emotions for a character, because a lot of times you think, oh, Stephen King's books are going to be filled with these awful people. And yes, there are awful people, but you get these gems of human beings, a little bit like Nick in The Stand, I think, who I like really, really felt for. And yeah, Herb is just, oh, absolute dad of the year, if you ask me. And yes, I know like he wished that his son would die because he didn't want him to suffer and it just didn't look like he was going to pull through. I totally understand, but I still think he was just so great. Like, I loved him. And poor Vera as well, like all she really wanted was what was best for her son. Again, my heart broke for Johnny when he realized that his mum was going to be dead by Christmas because of his gift, or curse, however you look at it. And there was like nothing really he could do because his mother wouldn't take the medication. There's just so many complex emotions with this family due to what Johnny had gone through and the gift he ended up taking from it. There's a random POV chapter very early on of a guy who thinks he's so slick and he's saying like, oh, I'm not a killer yet and stuff like that. And honestly, everything to do with the Castle Rock Strangler, I thought was like my favourite part of this story. Well, one of my favourite parts. There are actually quite a few moments in this where I'm like, that is actually like brilliant. I love that. So yeah, the whole Castle Rock Strangler section of this book, I just loved. And I have heard of Castle Rock before. And I know there was like a TV show, which I never watched. But I kind of knew of Castle Rock and I just was like, this is like interesting. Like, things are really starting to connect in this. There are so many connections with other things. Oh my gosh. Like there was a paperback with a gunslinger on it. So I'm thinking, oh, is that the gunslinger from the Dark Tower? And then there was like The Shining. At one point, Johnny is muttering, this little lad of man, I'm gonna let it shine. And then the shine, you know, like the shine, like the gift and stuff. And Mother Abigail from The Stand, come on. And then there's a girl later on as well who, you know, after there's like this fire at Kathy's and Johnny had like forewarned them about it. And she is like, you made this happen just like that girl in Carrie. And I'm like, oh my god, like, is Stephen King an author in this? What kind of weird inception is this? There might have been like a few other little like connections and stuff, but I just found Jerusalem's Lot was mentioned as well. Yeah, everything's connected, right? Everything's like pretty much connected. I got so excited every single time I saw a reference. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, like maybe the whole, this little lad, man, I'm gonna let it shine. Maybe that has nothing to do with it. And maybe the gunslinger on the cover of the book also has nothing to do with it, but I'm going to make my own conclusions, okay? Unless Stephen King says otherwise. Stephen King's the only man I'm going to listen to when it comes to his books. What point was I trying to make again before I went off on that tangent? Castle Rock. Oh, the Castle Rock Strangler, yeah. Love that entire section. See, this is why I thought this book was going to go in that direction of the whole procedural thing, because Sheriff George Bannerman, I think his name was, he's from Castle Rock, and he calls Johnny, and he needs his help because a 9-year-old girl has just been killed by the Castle Rock Strangler, and the Castle Rock Strangler has been at large for years. They need the help, like they need all the help they can get. So that's when I thought, oh, this story's going to go in the direction where Johnny's going to like continue to help the police to solve crimes. That's what I thought. And I wouldn't have minded that, honestly, because I love the whole section of, you know, Johnny trying to figure out who it is, and he's got this cigarette packet that is evidence, and he gets nothing, but he goes to the scene of the crime, and he starts to get the vision, like the psychic vision thing, and he starts to talk like the killer, and he snarls his face like the killer, and he's seeing it happen, and it's like awful and heartbreaking, an amazing use of his ability. And then he's like, oh, I know who did it. It was Frank Dodd, who he had only just met because he is one of the policemen who was under George Bannerman's employment. Frank Dodd works with the sheriff, and the sheriff's like, no, it can't be Frank Dodd, you know, like he's a great guy, and I've known him for years, I know his mum, and like he's babysat my daughter before and stuff like that. He's like, no, absolutely can't be. This is when I started to hate George Bannerman, because he also punches Johnny for even mentioning it, and also calls Johnny like a freak of God. And so I'm like, hang on a minute, Mr. George, you are the one who got Johnny all the way here because you wanted his help, and you're calling him all these names, you're saying he's wrong. Like, shut up. You know what I mean? Like when Johnny was like telling him, you brought me here, I was like, yes, tell him, Johnny, tell him. Just turned out to be Frank Dodd. When they go to Frank Dodd's house, oh my gosh, I had chills, because the mother, she knew the entire time as well. And when Johnny was like, she knew, oh my God, my heart dropped. I was like, really? Like she let that happen? She was like letting it go on for as long as it did? Oh my God, like what a messed up family unit that is. And then when you go and see Frank Dodd's room, it's like a child's room. You're like, damn, like I could have taken an entire book. Oh, like this whole thing, I'm telling you. And yeah, they go into the bathroom. Frank Dodd has cut his own throat with I confess. Oh my God, like that was so, oh, captivating. I was captivated. And yeah, I think it was like my favorite moment from this book, honestly, because it was just so riveting, and it didn't last enough. Like I think all of that happened in the space of like 40 pages, if that. And I was like, I could have taken more of that. I really could have. And I kind of loved the idea of Johnny just being able to say things anyway. So like loads of people end up sending him some stuff. Another really horrifying moment for me personally was when he touches, I think it was a scarf that a woman had sent that belonged to her brother, and she needed to know what happened to her brother. And he sees the brother sinking in quicksand, because that's actually how he died. Oh my gosh, like the way that it's described of like the quicksand like going into his mouth and on his tongue, one of the worst ways to go, like an absolute nightmare for me. Definitely horrifying to read. And so yeah, that was like another one of my favorite moments. The way that's described, the helplessness of that situation, just like sinking further and further, it getting up to your knees, your chin, in your mouth, and there's nothing you can do. Oh my gosh, that was definitely a horrifying moment too. And honestly, I went into this with like such the lowest of expectations, because I'd heard nothing really, and I knew nothing about it, and I've come out feeling like a winner. Sometimes I think the less you know about a Stephen King book, and the less hype that is like kind of dictating your opinions, really does help when you're not really thinking about any of that and you're just like diving straight in. But let's talk about Greg. Let's talk about him, because what an absolute scumbag arsehole. Hate him. The fact that the first scene we have of him is him kicking a dog to death. Oh my God, I wanted him to die from that moment. And that happened like right at the start of the book, essentially. It was like chapter like 2 or 3 or something. Like he was despicable. That's the first time you see him, kicks the dog to death, and then he smiles about it afterwards as well. Like the dog bites him, he's like, that's what you get for biting me. Even after the dog is dead, and he's like walking away, and he just smiles when he thinks about it. I'm like, you absolute evil, psychopathic, fucking you know what I mean? Oh my God, I hated him so much. So that was very effective, like a very effective way of introducing someone. And I hate when there's like animal abuse and like any kind of like animal death that is like so unnecessary. It happens so much in the Fear Street books, which I'm currently reading by R.L. Stein. Like it happens at like the most random of moments, just because R.L. Stein wants you to be scared and wants you to like randomly feel this emotion. Whereas with Stephen King and like the introduction of Greg, it's really to characterize Greg, to give you a sense of who he is from the very off, and it felt like a natural character thing for this bastard to do. So I didn't hate, I mean, I hate reading any kind of animal abuse anyway, but like I didn't like hate the decision to put it in here, if you know what I mean. And then Greg is like running for president, and Johnny gets like a bad sense when he like sees him on the TV, and then he ends up coming across Greg and touches him. He senses like destruction. He feels like he's gonna start some kind of like nuclear war. Like he needs to stop Greg from becoming the president. This is kind of like the third main section of the story. I would say like the first section is Johnny and his accident and coming out of the coma. Second part, I would say like Castle Rock Strangle a bit and learning about his abilities more. And then third part is Greg and the presidency. And I didn't mind all of those things. I would have thought that maybe one section of this would have dragged it down and made me not like it as much. A little bit like The Stand. The Stand had like 3 pretty distinct sections in it, and I definitely preferred like the first part in that over the second and third part, whereas in this one there are moments I love, but I think every single part in this was like just as riveting as the last. And so you have this dilemma with Johnny and wanting to stop Greg and wanting to stop something bad from happening, and there's like a question in this like, would you go back to kill Hitler if you could? And that kind of question is brought up by a couple of characters, by Johnny asking someone else, and it's a question that I feel like probably all of us have asked ourselves. And like, would you go back in time to stop something if you could, even if it like drastically changes everything that comes after? I kind of love that kind of question that is brought up, and I love Johnny trying to rationalize his decisions of like trying to stop Greg if he can, and him even trying to do it, him trying to assassinate him, which he totally fumbles the bag and like trying to actually like kill him, but like he still manages to stop him because freaking Greg, again being an absolute arsehole, grabs a child as this shooting is happening and uses this child as a human shield, which obviously like when that is photographed, the fact that he hid behind a child ruined his presidency chances anyway. So at least what Johnny tried to do and set out to do worked, even though like he did a shit job of trying to assassinate him. Like honestly, Johnny, you could have at least practiced a little bit more, come on. And so the assassination attempt with the president and stuff, all of that was still like pretty exciting, and I think a good way of ending the book, because that was kind of Johnny like signing his life over by that point. Like he knew what he had to do, he knew what he had to give up in order to stop this like really bad thing from happening. Again, demonstrating how selfless character Johnny is, despite him supposed to be like an unassuming person with the most unassuming of names. He is able to try and step up and use what he can, like his power, to do something good, which again is a very fascinating thing considering he was carrying his mother's voice, or don't ignore, you know, God's actions or like what God has given you and stuff like that. Like there are so many questions about that too. I feel like I probably would have taken like 1,200 pages of this over The Stand. Like, I'm sorry if that's blasphemous, but I honestly would have loved like more of an explanation and an exploration of all of that too. But I do wish with Greg we got a little bit more that wasn't like bogged down by those long stretches of backstory, because the other stuff wasn't like as interesting with Greg. Like when you see him blackmail a banker, for instance, with some infidelity photos, some of that kind of stuff I was like, I'm not really interested in all of that really personally. So like that's why this isn't like really like a 5-star or anything. Like I don't think this is a perfect book. I do again think the romance and stuff, while it was like great and I was shipping it and it was like very complex, not my favorite aspect of this book. And sometimes like the bogged down paragraph upon paragraph of exposition, which we're going to get in every single Stephen King book, I know, but I am getting used to it the more and more I'm reading of King's works. So with all of that said, I am giving The Dead Zone a 4-star, and it's currently my second favorite Stephen King book in this challenge. My favorite book of this video so far. Like, we went from strength to strength. We went from The Stand to The Long Walk to The Dead Zone, which again I feel like I'm going to get so much hate for saying. But yeah, I do think The Dead Zone is definitely like my favorite one so far. Hopefully Firestarter continues the trend of like being better than the last one. But I don't know, I think this one might be a little bit hard to top in this episode. I do wonder if we will ever get a full Stephen King episode where I love every book in that video. Unfortunately, today it's not that day, because this episode was honestly doing so well. And I guess you could say the same thing about the first episode, because the first 3 books in that video, I really enjoyed giving them all over a 3-star, and then Rage at the end of the previous episode wasn't the best, so it kind of dragged it down a little bit. And unfortunately, we are ending this episode with another book that I think drags it down a little bit. And I mean, I do still like this more than Rage. A little bit underwhelmed with this one, and I was quite bored during this too. While I thought like the premise was a good premise, the actual like setting of this and where the chunk of this story is set and the plot of this story and like the direction it goes in is just not my favorite. So in this one we follow young Charlie McGee, and she is only 7 years old at the very start of this book, so you already feel, well at least I do anyway, I felt quite protective of her to begin with. When we get introduced to her dad and her, they're on the run, there is like this green car following them and they seem like really desperate to get away, and you're like, why are they on the run, like what's going on? I mean obviously like with the premise of Charlie being a fire starter, you think think, oh, these people are after Charlie, and they're after them both. But you get to like certain passages where it's like Charlie has had to look after her father before, and I feel like, you know, me as a person, I felt like I wanted to protect Charlie. I felt like she was way too young to be having to look after her father every now and then, because Andie does say that she's done it before, she has looked after him before. It's like she's 7 years old, like she should be living as a child, like she should be playing out with her friends, she should be going to school and loving it, and you know, there's just so many things that I just found so tragic with Charlie's story, and this is very Carrie coded, I think. So there were so many parallels to Carrie that I could see in this, but obviously like this is a lot longer, and yeah, this just isn't as interesting as Carrie in my opinion. But when I saw this novel, I genuinely thought that this would be up there with the previous ones, because the intrigue at the start just really hooks me. You know, they are on the run, and then you hear about Vicky, who is Charlie's mother, and then you hear about the fact that her fingernails were torn out one by one, and you're like, by who and for why? And then Andie, he's able to, like the cab driver, he gives them a $1 bill, but he pushes and he makes the cab driver think it's like a $500 bill. So he has this like incredible power, a power that I wish I had. Like, could you imagine going into any shop you wanted, you pay them like the bare minimum, but you make the cashier think, or that they're taking that money? I mean, obviously that would be terrible, because then that poor cashier could end up losing their job if there's a till discrepancy by the end of the day. You know what I mean? Like, that would suck. I would feel bad for that. But the possibilities of that are just like so endless. So like, that was very interesting. And we do find out that Andie and Vicky were part of like experiments when they were like students, and they had like these kind of drug experiment things that gave them abilities. And so like Vicky could, I don't know, like turn the TV on when she isn't even looking at it, and you know, things like that. There was like random things that they could do. There was a moment when they seemed to have telepathy, Andie and Vicky, so that they could hear each other's thoughts. And so like they had this power, and then they run off together, they have a child, Charlie, and Charlie is like born with the power of pyrokinesis, as well as like some other powers as well, I think. There was one where like she's taken change from a phone box, and I don't know how she did that exactly, or it's just like something that anybody could do. I don't know if maybe like it just doesn't have anything to do with powers at all, but she's able to get all of the change out of this phone box thing so that she could take it back to her dad, so they had some money. Like, I don't know if that's a power or just something general, but the bottom line is she is born with this Firestarter ability, and obviously that makes her coveted, it makes her wanted, it makes her dangerous, like very, very dangerous. So like my mind went, okay, this is going to be a story about Charlie maybe going out of control a little bit like Carrie, and we'll have like a Carrie moment where she like kills some innocent people, and maybe her dad will look at Charlie and be like, yeah, like she is a danger to society, I need to put her down, kind of thing. I thought that's where this story was going to go, but instead it kind of turns into like a very clinical, very boring, they're sanctioned in the shop compound, they're separated from one another for a good chunk of this book, and this doesn't happen until like page 290 onwards. So like there's still a good chunk of that book beforehand where they're like on the run, and that was kind of exciting, but it did get a little bit repetitive, and I was kind of like, oh, we could probably like hurry this along by this point. And then yeah, they get to the shop compound, they've been separated, and I was just so bored. Like I was so bored. Like I don't like, you know, the experiments kind of angle to it. I don't like them being just like trapped in the people observing them just talking about what they're going to do, and like, oh, this is Charlie and she's dangerous, like what's going to happen if she grows older, and like all these questions that are asked. I don't care. Like I genuinely stopped caring by around that point, and I started to wish that this book would be over. And I didn't even wish that when I was reading The Stand. Like, yes, of course, like The Stand could have been a little bit shorter, and I didn't fully love like the second and third parts as much as the first part. I still really enjoyed that book, and this probably makes me appreciate The Stand a little bit more, I'm not gonna lie, because at least I didn't wish The Stand to be over as I was reading it. Whereas this one, I got around about page 350, 400, and I was like, I really want this to be done now. And I don't think it's the fact that I've read all these 4 Stephen King books in pretty much a week, because I am eating them up. Like, I love his writing style so much. I am really invested and intrigued by his premises. So obviously I did have that thought. I was like, oh, is it because you've like binged so much Stephen King in such a short amount of time? Are you just sick at this point? I would argue no, because I'm actually very excited to get into episode 3 already. Like, I want to continue this momentum. I want to go. But it's just the kind of style of this story. Like, I don't like experiment stories. I don't like it when it's set in like laboratories. You know, like it's just so boring to me. I much prefer when the setting is a little bit more imaginative and less clinical. I don't know. So I don't really have as much to say about this one, I think. I did really like when Charlie and Andie got to Irv and Norma's house, mainly because they had that little scuffle with the people who come, and then Charlie accidentally sets like the house on fire and stuff, and then Norma's like, you monster, like take your monster and go, kind of thing, to Andie. Charlie, which honestly broke my heart because it again reiterated the fact that Charlie is different and she won't be able to fit in. And I love themes like that. I love that kind of theme. It just furthered my heartbreak. It really did. Also, Stephen King loves to call his characters Norma. Like, even Charlie's middle name is Norma. I think her full name was like Charlene Norma McGee. And I'm sure there's been like other Normas in previous books. And it's funny because my mother's name is Norma. So I just feel like that's kind of interesting. I did really want to find out what happened to Vicky. We found out, you know, she was killed by the people at the shop and they had taken Charlie, and then Andie managed to save Charlie. That was pretty exciting. That was a good flashback. What else did I like? I didn't like him, but like I liked to read about him. But Rainbird, I thought he was very, very scary and intimidating, like when we first meet him, and he's talking about being intimate with Charlie, but like not in that way. And this is about like 270 pages in, by the way. I want to know how intimately Cap looked at him, horror struck. Rainbird understood suddenly, and he shook his head at Cap contemptuously. Not that intimately, not in the biblical sense, but I'll know her. She and I are going to be friends, Cap. If she's as powerful as all things indicate, she and I are going to be great friends. And that just sent a shiver down my spine. Yes, we would be very close. Like, he gave me the ick factor. You know what I mean? Like, the way that he would talk, like, he wants Charlie and her power. In the way that, you know, like, when Charlie's all locked up and she's separated from her father, John, or Raybird, like, he becomes, like, very close. Like, he becomes, like, pretty much best friends with Charlie at that point. He says that he is scared of the dark, which I'm kind of on the fence about, like, is he actually scared of the dark? I feel like he might have some, like, PTSD from, like, the war he was in, and I feel like there's a lot of layers there. Everything he does just felt so manipulative to Charlie, and he was taking Charlie's innocence and naivety and her, like, young age and used it against her, like, her empathy, her humanity, and he took advantage of that to get really close to her because he does want her and her power. And I just find that so scary because she does end up, like, really liking John, and she wants to protect him from the dark, and, like, her heart reaches out to him when she sees him scared of the dark. Like, that is just so heartbreaking to me because poor Charlie is being taken advantage of, and, like, so many people want to take advantage of her. And so, yeah, it does reiterate the fact that we need to protect Charlie with our lives. This poor girl, even though she has this destructive power in her, you do still feel for her, and you see other people trying to use her, and they see her as a monster or what have you, and she's kind of reduced to less than human, even though she is one of the most human characters in this book. And I loved her. I thought she was great. I loved her humour as well. I think John is the one who said to her, oh, light this and we'll show you to your father, like, we'll return you to your father. And Charlie is like, well, give me a match. And I don't know why, but I cackled. I thought that was so funny. And they're trying to get her to use her powers, and she's, like, refusing. She's refusing to cooperate. And I love that she was starting to get to a point where she could make demands. But obviously that was Rainbird who was also behind that, like, giving her that confidence, but giving that false sense of confidence because he is getting what he wants. Also, like, he's so manipulative. Like, one of the most manipulative Stephen King characters I've read so far. So I really did find him very interesting. I found Captain Hollister, he's like another kind of antagonist, but he was so underdeveloped in my eyes. I didn't really feel anything towards him. Like, I didn't even find him that interesting. I liked it when Andie was, like, using his power to get Cap to kind of get him and his daughter out of there. Like, he was convincing him to take him and her to Hawaii and stuff. Like, he was starting to get his ability back and, like, using it against everyone else. That was very good and interesting. But Cap himself, I don't know, I just wasn't really that taken by him. Not really much to say about him, honestly. Like, he pales in comparison to Rainbird. And I liked the ending. I thought the ending was pretty good, or at least, like, the climax of the Firestarter story, when Andie is shot by Rainbird and he unfortunately dies in, like, Charlie's arms, which is so sad. He dies mid-sentence. He smiled and pulled her even closer as if to whisper in her ear, but instead he kissed her. Love you, he said, and died. Like, he doesn't even finish her name, and then he's dead. Like, oh, poor Charlie having to witness that, you know? Give her that normal life. Even earlier in the book as well, she was like, it's never going to end. Like, it's never going to stop. People are always going to be going after her. And I kind of like how the novel ends a bit open-ended. So you kind of don't know exactly, like, how it's going to go with Charlie. She goes into the Rolling Stone office to tell her story, so I don't know how that's going to go. But yeah, even before that, sorry, like, right after, like, Andie dies, she does, you know, let go of her power. And it's kind of terrifying because it says that she felt relief when she did that, so you know that she held this all inside, but the destruction that comes from that, the people who die, some person gets randomly decapitated, she's submerged in power, the entire house exploded, she looked for something else to destroy, and she can't really stop it. She doesn't know how to stop it. She does, like, finally calm down, and there's, like, this random woman who's hurt, and Charlie's like, oh my god, your arm, like, let me help you, and this woman is, like, calling her a witch, she's telling her to get away, and then when Charlie's like, they killed my daddy, and she's like, well, they should have killed you too. Oh my god. Charlie put her out of misery, kill her. I'm kidding. None of this was fair to Charlie, and that is so devastating. It gave me, again, the same vibes of Carrie. Like, a lot of the stuff in Carrie, it just felt so unfair to her. So I am glad that Charlie is with Irv and Norma. I do, again, because I've read 3 books now where there's been like a couple, a man and a woman, and the woman has been a little bit hysterical in a way, and the man has been reasonable. Like, we've had that like 3 times now in this episode alone, because like when Andie and Charlie first arrive at Irv and Norma's house, and the house goes up in flames, and like there's a shootout and stuff like that, and the house is affected, Norma is like, take that monster and leave. It's Irv who is like, don't blame the girl, like the house is in shed, it's fine. So like Irv is calming his wife down, but like this is the 3rd time, not exactly in a row because the Long Walk didn't have it, but like in this Stephen King novel, so if we get rid of the Richard Bachman one, in the 3 Stephen King novels that we've just read, they've all had a man and a woman, a couple, the woman has been unreasonable and the man has been reasonable, and I'm wondering, like, does this change, or is this going to be a constant Stephen King motif at this point? It's getting a little bit old. And while I like Irv and Norma, I do feel like some of it was kind of rushed with them. Like by the end when Charlie is with them, I'm so glad like she's found somewhere where she can stay and she feels like accepted and welcome. There's a moment when Irv says, I love her, Norma, as if she was my own, and I know you do too, or something like that. And I was just like, I haven't really felt that though in this book. I don't know if maybe they're just like underdeveloped as well, because we saw them pretty early-ish on in the story, and then Charlie comes to them near the end, and I don't exactly know like how much time has passed from Andie dying to her getting to Irv and Norma's, and like them saying, oh, we love her. Maybe that was to do with like the push. Maybe like they were convinced that they loved her, and they didn't really. But then again, that would be kind of terrible. I don't know. It just felt so quick and so sudden. So I felt like Irv and Norma weren't like the best developed, and neither was Captain Hollister. So I do think Stephen King has a great way of writing characters like so much in his books. But I feel like there were some great characters in this. Like I really did like Charlie. I liked Annie. I liked Rainbird as a villain. And the other characters like Irv, Norma, and Cap, I felt like they were underdeveloped. So like there was a little bit of an imbalance with this one. Like this is the most imbalance I felt with a Stephen King book, if that makes sense. And I guess the same could be said with the plot. I like them running away and like the whole cat and mouse chase to begin with, and then as soon as they're caught, honestly I lost all interest. It really did struggle to hold my interest for a lot of this, and this is probably a me problem. It's just like not the kind of story I love. So with all that said and done, I am going to give this one 2 stars, but it is my least favorite one of this vlog, and it's my least favorite like Stephen King, his name on the cover book, like not a Richard Bachman book, but like a Stephen King book. It's my least favorite Stephen King novel at the minute. It was just meh to me. Not terrible, oh my god, not terrible, but just very meh. Very, very much. So these are the books. Oh, hey. Oh, not Tim, not again. So these are the books that I managed to finish in this video in order of how I preferred them. So The Dead Zone is my favourite one from this video, then The Long Walk, then The Stand, and then Firestarter. So comparing it to the poll that I put out, which got over 3,200 votes. So thank you so much for voting. And I will be doing this every episode. I will be putting a poll on my YouTube community page. So do subscribe, do check out my community page when I post a poll. I would love your input, and the more votes I get, the better, because then it'll make the results hopefully more accurate. But I did ask for your favourite that I'm reading in this video, and yeah, it was The Stand that came first with 46%, and then The Long Walk with 25%, and then Firestarter with 18%, and then The Dead Zone came dead last with 11%, which is obviously so opposite to me pretty much. I loved The Dead Zone the most, and I put The Long Walk second, which was also second in the poll, but the winner I have third, which happened in the first episode too. The Shining won the first poll, and then it came third in my overall ranking of that episode. So The Stand is third, and then Firestarter is my least favourite, and Firestarter came third in the poll. So honestly, I do love to know where I stand with like general Stephen King opinions, honestly. So I'm sorry that every single time you pick a book to win in these polls, they aren't exactly my favourite from the video. But like The Stand was very good. I did really like The Stand. Just not my favourite, but who knows, maybe in the future, you know, ratings will bump up and change or move down, you know, that could happen. So my TBR for episode 3, which should be coming around about December time, because I'm doing these videos like nearly every 2 months-ish. I have these books to read, so the TBR is substantially shorter than the previous one in terms of page count. But from the Bachman books, we have Roadwork, and then Cujo, and then back to the Bachman books with the final book in this collection, which is called The Running Man. So I'll actually be finishing this entire book in the next episode, and then finishing off episode 3 with Christine. So 2 Bachman Bachman books in the next one, 2 Stephen King books. It's going to be 50-50. Very excited to find out what everyone thinks about these books. Do let me know in the comments below if you have a particular one in the next episode you're most excited to hear my thoughts on. But I'm very excited. Like, I could literally start them like right now if I... Well, I can't. I want to edit all this first and obviously do other videos. But like, I am very excited. Firestarter has not put me off Stephen King, okay? So that is the end of episode 2 of Gavin Reads All the King. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave this video a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you haven't already. Leave all the comments down below. Let me know what you thought of The Stand, The Long Walk, The Dead Zone and Firestarter. Let me know all of your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on my thoughts. Do we agree? Do we disagree? Tell me everything below, but keep it respectful. I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for supporting my channel. If you'd like to join my Patreon, then the link is in the description box. But yeah, I hope I will see you in the next video. Bye.